Well, let's begin the meeting at 6. We'll call it 6:30. That clock is different from this clock that's standing to our flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's your son with some relevance since you don't have any audience. Next. Just go on to the business if you want.
And if you would turn on your mics, I think we'll have enough battery power that you can probably just leave them on.
Yeah.
Say it again.
I would suggest just leaving your microphone on the whole time because I think the batteries will survive. We've got some new ones that are working better.
Okay. Anyway, let's do a roll call. Angela, for the record.
Okay. Eva Journey,
Present.
Greg Korn, Jamie Melcher,
Present.
Henry Wolthius,
Here.
Jeffrey Parker, Greg Stevens,
Here.
and David Lohman. So 3 absent, 4 present.
So we have enough to do something if we needed to.
Yep.
Okay. The next item was the meeting minutes. I trust everybody's had a chance to review those. Are there any corrections? Then please, somebody make a motion. We'll pass them.
I would move to approve the June 17th, 2021 meeting minutes of the Planning Commission.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes of June 17th, 2021, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? They are approved. So we have no public hearings, and I think the rest of the night's going to be spent on our development goals.
Yep.
Gosh, that was easy.
Want me to start?
So let's turn the time over to Angela and
Right.
Blair.
I have it that we ended on, or that we are starting on 17.20 commercial highway zone, page 11, or yeah, 11-30. Does that sound correct? Or I have it marked. I guess it would be 2-30, Article 2-30.
Which page?
Article 2-30, which is, it'll be number 11 in your tab. So Greg, the tabs right here. The tabs, number 11.
And Angela, you might try being a little closer to the microphone. But I'm the one that has the handicaps. I'm not throwing any arrows. Go ahead.
I'm just waiting to see. Greg, did you find it?
Yeah,
Okay.
11:30, 11-30 on the bottom.
Yep. And 17.20 at the top. All right, 17.20 commercial highway C2. 17.20010 purpose. The purpose of the C2 zone is to provide areas suitable and desirable for highway related commercial enterprises intended to meet the business needs of area residents and highway travelers. The C2 zone is appropriate in areas along or near US Highway 20 east and west of downtown Sweet Home, which have developed with commercial activities or which have potential for such activity as long as sufficient vehicular access control is maintained. 17.20.020 permitted uses. The following uses, when developed under the applicable development standards in the development code, are permitted in the C2 zone. A, parking lot. B, daycare center. C, community center. D, bus depot, taxi cab stand. E, club, lodge, fraternal organization. F, newspaper office, print shop. G, commercial enterprises with customer drive-in service facilities pursuant to requirements in section 17.18.060. H, automobile service station, provided in any incidental automobile repair shall be performed entirely within the enclosed building. I, automobile, boat, truck, trailer sales, service, rental, display, storage, and repair. J, cabinet or similar woodworking shop. K, cold storage plant, ice processing plant. L, feed seed store. M, heavy equipment, implement, machinery sales, service, rental, display, storage, and repair. N, lumber, building material sales and storage. O, outdoor commercial amusement or recreation establishment such as miniature golf course or drive-in theater, but excluding uses such as racetrack or automobile speedway. T, plumbing, heating, electrical, or paint contractors, storage, sales, or repair shop. Q, tire sales or repair shop. R, truck terminal, freight depot. S, warehouse, storage area, including mini storage. T, hostel establishment. U, motel, hotel, rooming, boarding house establishment. V, a commercial enterprise which may be classified as belonging to one of the following use groups. 1, retail store or shop, such as food store, drug store, apparel store, hardware store, or furniture store. 2, automobile, boat, truck, or trailer sales establishments, provided any associated repair shall be incidental to the operation and that all sales, service, storage, repair, and display shall occur within an enclosed building. 3, personal or business service establishments such as barber or beauty shop, dry cleaning establishment, tailor shop, or locksmith. 4, repair shop, for the type of good offered for sale in retail trade establishment permitted in C2 zone, such as shoe repair, small appliance repair shop, television repair shop, or watch repair shop. 5, eating or drinking establishments such as restaurant, tavern, or cocktail lounge. 6, office, business, or professional, including medical clinics. 7, small animal clinic or animal hospital, provided all animals shall be kept at all times within an enclosed building. 8, financial institutions such as a bank. 9, indoor commercial amusement or recreation establishment such as a bowling alley, theater, or pool hall. W, antique shop or secondhand store, provided all business, service, storage, sales, repair, and display shall be conducted entirely within an enclosed building. 17.20.030, special uses. The following uses, when developed under the applicable development standards of the Development Code and special development requirements, are permitted in the C2 zone. A, property line adjustments subject to provisions in Chapter 17.92. Partitions subject to provisions in Chapter 17.58. Subdivisions subject to provisions in Chapter 17.58. Planned development subject to provisions of Chapter 17.60. E, home occupations with pre-existing residents subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.68. F, bed and breakfast within a pre-existing residence subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.76. G, temporary uses subject to the provisions of 17.74.
So could I just ask you about F? Am I good? Can you hear me now? It's probably better. This is better. Didn't we come up with a different terminology for bed and breakfast, given we were looking at Airbnbs? And I couldn't remember what that might have been.
I'll have to go back and look.
It would probably be
Oh,
back in.
we have bed and breakfast establishments, is what we said.
Because Airbnbs don't do the breakfast, and so
It says, all we had is notes. It says bed and breakfast establishments, add compensation and see boarding below.
so maybe you could just put a note to look elsewhere for, because I know we brought up discussions before about Airbnbs.
How are Airbnbs separate from bed and breakfast? To me, like an Airbnb is like a home and someone's renting it out temporarily. But a bed and breakfast actually has lodging inside. They provide meals. And it's not like the owner is away. Like on an Airbnb, the owner's away.
Airbnbs are difficult we're not set up to really regulate them very well because
Yeah.
we don't have business licenses and they usually don't involve it being anything different than a residential home.
Right.
And so there's almost nothing for us to approve if somebody comes to us. So that's kind of the problem, is they operate in kind of a gray area for us. So I'm not sure how they would be caught in this at all.
So I'm just wondering about the language. I'm just thinking like 4 or 5 years from now, if when, you know, things are a little different, do we have some language that can morph forward to that kind of a business?
I think it really depends. It's hard to say because a lot of that depends on what direction the council wants to take on whether that should be regulated or not.
Yeah,
Because right now we're not seeing any
Yeah.
problems,
yeah,
and it doesn't really affect anything because it's basically just a short-term rental,
Yeah.
right.
and we don't regulate short-term rentals. Just like we don't have any provision in here for whether a house is leased or not. It's just not there because it's assumed that whether somebody's leasing it or not, it's going to be the same type of use as a residential home. Whereas a bed and breakfast to be more like
That's a business.
a business operating.
So those are exclusive of each other.
I would think so. That they're much different than each other.
And I don't see anything, well, in the definitions anyway, and it might be in another section, but I'll have
Yeah.
to look a little bit.
Well, and that was my lack of memory, because I know we had some discussion in the definitions section, but I don't really remember.
Yeah, definitions, we don't have anything for Airbnb. It's just for the bed and breakfast, so. But I put a note to look through
Okay.
and just see.
All right.
I drink more water during these meetings than any other time. Okay, 17.20.040, conditional uses. The following uses require approval of a conditional use permit. A, church, nonprofit, religious, or philanthropic institution. B, governmental structure or use of land. C, public utility facility. D, machine and welding shop, sheet metal, wood, fiberglass manufacturing, and other similar uses. E, amateur radio antennas. F, commercial radio stations and antennas. G, marijuana retailer or medical dispensary. H, other uses compatible with the purpose and intent of the zone and whose offsite impacts would not significantly exceed those of other conditionally permitted uses listed in this section. 17.20.050, dimensional standards. A, unless otherwise permitted in this development code, the following minimum dimensional standards shall be required for all the development in the C2 zone. Minimum lot area, all development, none. Minimum setbacks, front yard, 20 feet. Side yard, 0 feet. Street side yard, 20 feet. Rear yard, 0 feet. Side yard adjacent to residential zone, 10 feet. Rear yard adjacent to a residential zone, 10 feet. Maximum structure height, principal and accessory building, 35 feet, and maximum lot coverage, 75%.
So I have a question about the maximum lot coverage, because in the C1 zone, the maximum lot coverage is 50%. And I'm just for curiosity's sake, where did the increase of 25% lot coverage, how does that compute? I know the C1 is more of a central downtown business, whereas C2 stretches along the highway, but I don't know where the lot coverage
I think
rationale.
that was something that we were going to investigate, because typically in a central commercial zone, lot coverage is up to 100%.
I remember we talked about
And
that.
and so I have that circled as this is something we need to bring up with the drafters and correct. And we haven't interfaced with them since having that conversation.
Okay, yeah, and again, I couldn't remember if it's better to have the C2 zone be 50% or the
Yeah.
C1 zone be
No,
75%.
It really should be the C1 100%
Mm,
rather than 50. It doesn't. I don't know of any central commercial area that
Yeah.
is not that high density.
Yeah,
So
okay.
B, minimum setback, where a side or rear yard is not required and a structure is not to be erected at the property line, it shall be set back at least 3 feet from the property line. C, setbacks for automobile service stations, freestanding gasoline pumps, and Pump islands may occupy a required front or street side yard, provided they are a minimum of 15 feet from the property line separating the yard from the street. 17.20.060 Development Standards. All development in the C2 zone shall comply with the following specific standards. A, off-street parking. Uses identified in the zone shall comply with provisions in Chapter 17.44. B, signs. Signs shall conform to the standards contained in Chapter 17.50. C, fencing. Fences shall conform to the provisions contained in Section 17.52. D, landscaping. Landscaping improvements shall conform to the provisions contained in Section 17.54. E, yards and lots. Yards and lots shall conform to the provisions contained in Chapter 17.56. F, site development. Review. All new development, expansion of an existing structure or use in the C2 zone shall be subject to the site development review procedures of Chapter 17.102. G, outdoor storage and display. Outdoor storage shall be limited to those items normally displayed, such as automobiles for an automobile dealerships. Permanent outdoor storage of merchandise, material, or equipment shall be permitted, provided the storage area is surrounded by a site obscuring fence. Temporary outdoor display shall be allowed, providing the display of merchandise is limited to business hours. H, exterior lighting. Exterior lighting shall be located in such a manner so as not to face directly, shine, or reflect glare onto a street, a highway, or a lot in a residential zone.
So, of course, I have a question about this. So the word I'm missing here is trespass, like trespass onto other adjacent properties. We've used that word in previous items. However, given the nature of this zone is potentially requiring that there is no like trespass onerous to the owner or occupant of the business or building.
So I haven't seen the word trespass used in codes for lights usually. At least if in code language. Now trespass usually is limited to people.
Yeah, no, it's used. It's like trespass is used. I can
Okay.
show you examples of that.
All right. I just haven't run across it. But I guess my thought is that in a commercial, in a commercial highway area, suppose you have two different commercial uses next to each other.
Yeah.
And to insist that one not have any light go on to the other seems a bit onerous. Now, making sure that the residential zones
Right.
are blocked, I think that makes
Right.
a lot of sense. But I'm not so sure that it really does anybody any good to require that for other neighboring commercial properties.
Well, maybe you could put a star by that and see if there are other.
I mean, is that something you would like to
Yes.
see if we can do?
Yes.
I guess I'd like to know more about the thinking behind that. For one commercial business as opposed to another.
Well,
Are the problems with that?
So this is just an opinion.
Uh-huh.
But there's a lot of light trespass in general, not just there's a lot in residential areas.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering how that might apply in a commercial area or zone. And when I brought this up in the past, like 10 years ago, alternate comments were made such as, well, we don't have enough light. And so, so that was a support for wherever the light goes is okay.
Most commercial areas, there is definitely a lot of people who like to see them well lit,
Right.
especially to make things easier to find for drivers passing by,
Right.
and to make things safe for customers at night and things like that.
And that can be done, but there also can be thoughtful shielding of the
Mhm.
light,
Mhm.
and that would also influence trespass onto neighboring properties.
Mm.
So if you look at like organizations like the National Night Sky
Mhm.
people, they've got language in there about light trespass.
So, but isn't that more along the lines of kind of dark sky regulations where it tries to keep lights from
From going up,
shooting
right.
up?
But they also talk about the neighborhood.
Mm.
So, you know, in as much as this is shine will not glare onto the street, a highway or a lot. I mean, I guess you could make an argument that that language is enough. So I'm just proposing maybe there's one word missing and that might be trespass. Just saying.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We dealt with that. Before we go too much on 17-20, excuse me, .06A, off-street parking. I don't see any parking information in 1744. Like I don't see a 1744.
It is number 20.
So
look
tab,
at the
yeah,
tab.
tab 20 is 17.44. It's in Article 3.
3-20. Right, keep going further. Bottom of the page. You got it.
Tab number 20.
Well, that's where I was. I'm in tab 20.
So tab 20 on, it's Article 3,
And it describes
17.44.
Parking at 1744 and tab 20 doesn't go that far. Unless I'm
Tab
still
20
learning.
right here. You have 220.
Yeah, there is two. There is two.
There's a,
It's
it's the first 20.
1744.
Oh, but it's under tab number 20. This tab.
Yeah, the tabs here are not part of the code. They're just for ease of our review. 17.44 is in Article 3.
I see it. I was looking under tab 17. My apologies.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay. So we can move on.
Okay, just the last one. Other. A property owner is advised other regulations may apply for a property in an identified natural resource area, section 17.28, the flood hazard area, section 17.30, and in or near an identified historical site, section 17.32.
Any other questions on that zone?
I do not.
Okay. 17.22 industrial zone I. 17.22.010 purpose. The purpose of the industrial zone is to provide areas suitable and desirable for all types of industrial activity, provided that development controls are utilized to minimize possible harmful effects related to air and water pollution and to potential nuisance hazards such as fire, explosion, or noise. The I zone is appropriate in those large areas already developed for industrial use and in those areas possessing site characteristics suitable for industry, such as good access to highway and rail facilities, readily available water and sewer systems, level and well-drained sites, and little or no potential hazard to nearby residential or commercial areas. You get in touch with Greg Korn, and it's fixed. If he goes to live.sweethomeor.gov and clicks on Planning Commission meetings, he should be able to connect. Yeah, he emailed me. Okay.
Do we regulate odor emissions?
I believe it falls under our nuisance. But I can look into that. I don't know that our development code really goes, I mean, I think when it comes to conditional uses, odor is one of those things that's examined. But that's something to keep in mind with industrial uses, certainly. And I think later in this chapter, there may be some provisions on odors. We should keep an eye out for that. 17.22.020 permitted uses. The following uses, when developed under the applicable development standards in the development code, are permitted in the I zone. A, manufacturing and assembly, secondary processing. 1. Food processing, including canning, freezing, drying, dairy products, and similar food processing and preserving. Beverage bottling facility, including warehousing and distribution, but excluding processes which involve the slaughter of animals. 2. Textile mill products, including apparel and other finished products made from fabrics and similar materials. 3. Furniture and fixtures, including retail wood products. 4. Printing, publishing, and allied industries. 5. Rubber and miscellaneous plastics. 6. Leather and leather goods, but excluding a tannery. 7. Cement, glass, clay, and stone products manufacturing. 8. Fabricated metal products. 9. Electrical and electronic equipment, machinery, and supplies, but excluding batteries. 10. Battery manufacture, sales, and service. 11. Measuring, analyzing, and controlling instruments, photographic, medical, and optical goods, watches, and clocks. 12. Freight animals, including loading docks, storage, warehousing, and wholesale distribution, cold storage lockers, and similar personal storage facilities such as mini storage warehouses. 13. Other manufacturing, wholesaling, or distributing activities similar to those listed. Commissioner Korn, do you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Sorry about the delay on that. Glad you could finally
No problem.
connect.
Do we need to clarify something a little bit between 10 and 9 and 10? We exclude batteries and then we include batteries.
Seems unusual. I suppose they wanted to keep those separate, but that's a good question.
I started hearing where we were, but I don't know what page we're on.
Okay, we are on it's tab 12, the first 12, 17.22 industrial zone. And I just read through 17.22.020A, and I'm about to read B. That's on page II-35. B, wholesale trade and distribution facilities, but excluding trade and distribution involving 1, metals and minerals, 2, scrap and waste material, 3, farm product raw materials, 4, chemicals and allied products, 5, petroleum and petroleum products. C, public and private utility facilities, including water and sewage treatment facilities, substations, pumping stations, and other similar facilities with outdoor equipment storage permitted. D, commercial radio stations and antennas. 17.22.030 special uses. The following uses, when developed under the applicable development standards of this development code and special development requirements, are permitted in the I zone. A, property line adjustments subject to provisions in Chapter 17.92. B, partitions subject to provisions in Chapter 17.58. C, subdivisions subject to provisions in 17.58. D, planned development subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.60. E, temporary uses subject to provisions in Chapter 17.72. For some reason, A and B have a smaller font. I don't know why. That's got to be a typo. 17.22.040 conditional uses. The following uses require approval of a conditional use permit. A, manufacturing and related uses including 1, cement, lime, or similar products manufacture. 2, explosives storage or manufacture. 3, petroleum products manufacture or refining. 4, pulp mill. 5, rendering plant, tannery, slaughterhouse. 6, smelting, refining of metallic ore. And 7, other uses similar to the above which may possess characteristics injurious to public health and safety due to emission of smoke, noise, dust, odor, refuse, fumes, vibration, or similar hazard. So that would be the odor going in there. B, automobile wrecking yard, junkyard. C, public utility or safety facility. D, a single-family dwelling occupied by the owner, manager, night watch person, or caretaker of the industrial establishment. E, marijuana producer, marijuana processor, marijuana wholesaler, a marijuana laboratory, a marijuana test facility, a marijuana grow site, and a marijuana processor site. F, other uses compatible with the purpose and intent of the zone and whose offsite impacts would not significantly exceed those of the other conditionally permitted uses listed in the section. 17.22.050 dimensional standards. A, unless otherwise permitted in this development code, the following minimum dimensional standards shall be required for all development in the I zone. Minimum lot area for all development, there's none. Minimum setbacks. Front yard 20 feet, side yard 0 feet, street side yard 20 feet, rear yard 0 feet, side yard 20 feet, side yard adjacent to R zone 20 feet, side yard adjacent to R zone 20 feet. Maximum structure height, principal and accessory building, no limit. Maximum lot coverage, 75%. B, minimum setback. Where a side or rear yard is not required and a structure is not to be erected at the property line, it shall be set back at least 3 feet from the property line.
Are we happy with the maximum height of no limit?
I think that's different than what we currently have. But I don't recall exactly what the standard is now.
I'm not against skyscrapers, but
Well, and keep in mind, it's not going to be a skyscraper because it's not going to have any, well, typically you don't have a skyscraper that's all industrial uses in it. But yeah, it could be an issue.
everybody else is happy. I did, okay.
Do you want me to look up what our current standard is?
Some of those mill buildings can be pretty tall, but that would seem appropriate for that zone.
Yeah, I have had businesses looking for land, the referrals that we get from Business Oregon. I have had some of those inquiries that ask if we have problems with something about that's 100 feet in height. And I think specifically they usually are talking about, well, they're technically not smokestacks, but people think of them as smokestacks. They're usually for steam emissions, to get them up to a certain height. And so it is often that big users are looking for some pretty tall allowances, but in an industrial zone, that's not all that unusual. But if you have strong feelings about it, we should certainly look at limiting that.
We know what it is now.
I'm looking that up right now. Oh. Yeah, right now we don't have a limit. It just says building heights shall not be restricted. However, all buildings exceeding 35 feet in height to be constructed or substantially altered or extended shall meet all applicable state of Oregon and city standards related to public safety and fire protection. So which would have to happen regardless whether we put it in this code or not.
Just seems a little odd that we've let that completely open. You know, we can put some language in that it need to be reviewed by the planning commission or.
I think the reason this hasn't been done in the past is that when it comes to these types of industries, there's an economic development angle to it that people want to make it as easy as possible to bring industry into a community as long as it's located in the right spot. And so that would be my argument, I guess, for leaving it as is, leaving it unrestricted, is just to make it as flexible as possible for those types of uses. I guess the main question is what could happen if we had some extreme situation come in. And typically these industries, the tall part is going to be that smokestack or that steam emissions portion. Usually it's not economical to have anything else that goes that high.
Just by example, however, You know, we could have a paper mill that would be multiple stories.
Mhm.
I think it wouldn't hurt to put something down there that would be subject to review.
Is there I mean, are you thinking of an actual height that if it's over a certain height you want to review, or, you know, what's the threshold?
I don't know. What do the rest of you think?
I think our industrial lands have been identified for these types of uses already. So I wouldn't object to the no limit.
I kind of agree with Henry. I would rather have some kind of definition, but I don't know what it would be.
Okay. Would you like some staff research on that? We can look into other codes in other places, or
Well, of course, we would welcome almost any kind of industry that comes to Sweetwater. We would, I think we'd typically bend over backwards to accommodate them. On the other hand, they're turning more and more into a bedroom community. And, you know, you could have a paper mill in your backyard that would be 5 or 6 stories high, 7 or 8 stories high.
I think economic development inquiries would look at that restriction and think public hearing, now it's opened up to testimony and appeal, which they might say, we don't even want to go there.
I do know that there's a lot of industries that are very skittish about
Yeah.
triggering a public review like that. And most of them can find a place to locate that will be free and easy, without restrictions, and so they'd be more likely to go that direction. That's probably the likely consequence. So I would be concerned about that, but if there's a threshold you want to look at, it certainly wouldn't end here anyway. It would be the remaining review period for the whole code, and then it would go before the city council too. So it's not just it's not necessarily a done deal if you decide a different standard tonight.
Why don't we just let you do some additional research?
Okay.
And also, if you look at the comprehensive plan, there are not very many locations where the industrial zone is evident on it. It's pretty limited, really. So just pointing that out. But I agree with Henry. Additional research is always good. I'll go for that.
Okay. We'll see what we can find on that. All right, that brings us to 17.22.060 development standards. All development in the I zone shall comply with the following, specific, well, that doesn't make sense. All development in the I zone shall comply with the following specific standards, and then get rid of shall apply. A, off-street parking. Parking, driveway, and loading improvements shall comply with provisions in Chapter 17.44. B, signs. Signs shall conform to the standards contained in Chapter 17.50. C, fencing. Fences shall conform to the provisions contained in Section 17.52. It's going back and forth between chapter and section. I think we need to look into that and be consistent.
Are we calling these chapters or sections?
So I would say that, you know, for instance, 17.24 is a chapter, but 17.24.010 is a section of a chapter, is how I would think of it.
Yeah.
But we just need to, I'll get with Walt and clarify it and make it consistent. D, landscaping. Landscaping improvements shall conform to provisions contained in section 17.54. E, yards and lots. Yards and lots shall conform to provisions contained in chapter 17.56. F, site development review. All new development and expansion of an existing structure or use in the I zone shall be subject to the site development review procedures of chapter 17.102. G, exterior lighting. Exterior lighting shall be located in such a manner so as not to face directly, shine, or reflect glare onto a street, a highway, or a lot in a residential zone. H, limitations on use. Uses permitted outright involving manufacture and all conditional uses shall meet all applicable standards and regulations of the Oregon State Board of Health, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and any other public agency having appropriate regulatory jurisdiction. Prior to approval of conditional use permits or zoning permits, evidence shall be submitted to the city indicating that the proposed activity has been approved by all appropriate regulatory agencies. I, other. A property owner is advised other regulations may apply for property in an identified natural resource area, section 17.28, the flood hazard area, section 17.30, and in or near an identified historical site, section 17.32. You up?
Yep.
And this zone is a new one for us. We do not currently have a public facility zone. It would be really nice if we did.
17.24, public facility zone, PF. 17.24010, purpose. The purpose of the public facility zone is to provide areas appropriate for specific public and semi-public uses and to ensure their compatibility with adjacent uses. It is intended that this zone be applied to individual parcels shown to be an appropriate location for a certain public or semi-public use. 17.24.020, permitted uses. The following uses are permitted in the PF zone and subject to a site design review. A, educational facilities including 1, kindergartens, 2, elementary, junior high, and high schools, 3, stadiums and athletic fields, 4, playgrounds, 5, open space. B, municipal service facilities including 1, fire and police stations, 2, city hall, 3, community centers and recreation facilities, 4, sewage treatment facilities, 5, water treatment facilities, 6, public workshops, 7, wireless telecommunications facilities, 8, libraries, 9, parks and open space. 17.24.030, special permitted uses. The following uses, when developed under the special development requirements, are permitted in the PF zone. A, property line adjustments subject to the provision of Chapter 17.92. B, partition subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.58. C, subdivision subject to the applicable provisions of Chapter 17.58. 17.24040, conditional uses. The following uses require approval of a conditional use permit. A, fraternal and civic organizational facilities. B, hospitals and overnight clinics. C, semi-public facilities such as houses of worship, cemeteries, monasteries, and similar. D, any other use that is compatible with the purpose and intent of the zone and that would have off-site impacts that would not significantly exceed those that are typical of the other conditionally permitted uses listed in this section. 17.24.050, dimensional standards. The following dimensional standards shall be required for all development in the public facility zone. Minimum lot area, sufficient to allow the use and comply with setback requirements. Minimum setbacks, front yard, non-residential, none. Front yard residential, 15 feet. Side yard, non-residential, none. Side yard residential, 15 feet. Rear yard, non-residential, none. Rear yard residential, 15 feet. Maximum structure height, 60 feet, and maximum lot coverage, 80%. 17.24060, development standards. All development in the public facility zone shall comply with the applicable provisions of section 2.4, should probably be 2.40 of this code. In addition, the following specific standards shall apply. A, off-street parking, all uses identified in the zone shall comply with provisions in chapter 17.44. B, signs shall comply with the standards contained in chapter 17.50. C, fences shall comply to the provisions contained in section 17.52. D, landscaping improvements shall conform to provisions contained in section 17.54. E, yards and lots shall conform to the provisions contained in chapter 17.56. F, design review, all new development or expansion of existing structure or use in the shall be subject. Existing structures or use in the shall be subject to the site and design review procedures. Does that sound
Right.
off to you? It does.
All new development or expansion of existing structure
It
or use.
needs some editing there.
Yeah, it should be in the, it needs to be deleted.
You shall be, okay, there we go. Shall be
And
subject
it
to
should be
site design.
an
review.
existing structure or use.
Okay. G, other, a property owner is advised other regulations may apply for property in an identified natural resource area. Section 17.28, the flood hazard area, section 17.30, and in or near an identified historical site, section 17.32.
So I'd like there to be an item H for lighting and however we define lighting standards from other zones to be put in here as well.
Okay. So similar to the industrial commercial.
Do we have the public zone identified? And is it what is shown on our comprehensive plan map as public?
So
No.
we, in our zoning map, we don't have a public facility zone at all. I believe the comprehensive plan
As
Public.
has something in there.
It has public, but
Yeah, but it's
not really relevant. Doesn't seem to be relevant to what
Yeah.
the content in here.
so I guess the way this would work is that we would probably when we adopt this, we would probably want to amend the zoning map so that all the land that is publicly owned for these types of purposes is changed over to this zone. I don't know that we would have any undeveloped areas that would be targeted for this zone. It would be more along the lines of when that property is purchased or when it's dedicated over to the city that it is changed to that zone. I'm not sure. It would probably require something in the a comp plan amendment where you basically have a provision that says, okay, as the city grows and as schools and these facilities are necessary, it'll be allowed in all of these zones, subject to these provisions, that kind of thing. But I just don't, because if you had a store of undeveloped land that's all zoned public facilities, then what do you do? It's very limited in what it can be used for.
So on like industrial, and then in public facility zone, I just kind of noticing where it abuts a residential zone. I don't know if residents would necessarily want to just have an outright permitted sewage treatment plant right in their backyard.
Right.
And is there anything that we can say except when abutting a residential zone and then it becomes a conditional use? Or that neighbors who will be impacted by that would have a say? And there was some in the industrial zone too, that where it's abutting a residential, you have a 20-foot setback, but there could be major traffic increase. Neighborhoods, it might really impact these residential neighborhoods. And they won't, if it's permitted outright, then they won't be able to have a say in that.
Right. That's a good question.
I mean, most of these are hardly any impact at all, but there are a few that I would want to, if someone was gonna put any type of treatment plant or industrial use next to me, I would want to have.
Yeah, I mean, things like the sewage treatment plant, the water treatment plant, public workshops, wireless telecommunications facility, big.
Public workshops, you have machinery going in and out at early morning hours and.
Yeah. So I think those would be more concerning.
And maybe just where it abuts a residential
Yeah.
zone. Then maybe at least administrative review, so the neighbors get notice and would have an opportunity to submit something.
Just a little bit of background too, one of the reasons why this zone will be handy is right now, such as we have been doing construction and we had to do a property line adjustment for Sankey Park. It's technically zoned residential. So we have to do a conditional use permit to do anything on it. And anytime we make a change, we have to do another conditional use permit. So getting some of these actually into the zone that they
Yeah.
should be in will be
Yeah.
much easier
Yeah.
process.
And
Yeah.
York would have very minimal.
Right. Well, I think for most parks, unless it's going to be something that has a huge amount of people drawn to it on a
Yeah.
regular basis, most people are going to love having that
Oh,
in
yeah.
their neighborhood. But it is, yeah, I get it. That is a concern. Let me talk to Wald about that and see how we would want to organize that, because it's only limited to certain uses where that would be a
Yeah.
problem,
Yes,
that
have a little more impact.
Yeah, because there's nothing, I mean, not going to be really an issue with a community center being adjacent to a
No.
residential zone, but public workshop, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Okay.
it's a good point. Where were we?
We're done with that one.
Oh, that one's done already? Oh, yeah, that one is done. All right. Moving on. Tab 14. (17.26) Recreation Commercial Zone, RC, the current zone. 17.2, and this, even though we've talked about the possibility of getting rid of this zone or having it morph into something else, chances are we'll have to keep it in our code, because unless we want to go and rezone all the properties that currently have this zone, which adds a little bit of level of complexity. So, I mean, it could be that some people will want this to remain and some may want to change. So I guess keep in mind what we want to do that way. If we want to get rid of it entirely, it will mean rezoning everything that currently has that designation. So in the past, I don't think the city has really had a policy of doing that. We update our comprehensive plan, and then it's really up to the property owner when they decide they want to change the zone to fit the comprehensive plan.
So is this the planned recreation commercial on the comprehensive plan?
Yes.
All this purple stuff?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. 17.26.010 purpose. The purpose of the RC zone is to provide and maintain areas which possess unique characteristics for recreation-related commercial and residential development, and which are suitable and desirable for recreation businesses, for tourists and recreationists in the area. A high standard is essential in order to maintain and enhance the appearance of the area and its unique value to the community. 17.26.020 permitted uses. In an RC zone, the following uses and their accessory uses are permitted outright. A, motel, hotel, or resort. B, recreational vehicle park. C, recreational vehicle park with owner timeshare. D, museum or art gallery. E, community center, meeting facility, convention center, or similar use. F, residential uses related to or in conjunction with a recreational development. G, eating and drinking establishment. H, recreational retail such as ski, hiking, climbing, or similar equipment. I, arts and crafts workshops and retail sales. J, amusement or recreation services. K, recreational teaching facilities. L, single-family dwellings on legal lots of record at the time of enactment of this chapter. 17.26.030 special uses. The following uses, when developed under the applicable development standards of this development code and special development requirements, are permitted in the RC zone. A, property line adjustments subject to provisions in Chapter 17.92. B, partitions subject to provisions in Chapter 17.58. C, subdivisions subject to provisions in Chapter 17.58. D, planned development subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.60. E, home occupations within a pre-existing residence subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.68. F, residential accessory dwellings subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.72. G, bed and breakfast within a pre-existing residence subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.76. H, temporary uses subject to provisions in Chapter 17.72. 17.26.040, conditional uses. The following uses require approval of a conditional use permit. A, aggregate extraction.
So I have a question about that because we're talking potentially about maybe a gravel pit or something, or a quarry or,
Are you thinking that's not recreational?
well, I'm thinking about what that would do
Yeah.
to an area that is being developed for something completely different.
Yeah. So just again, because this is existing, this is exactly the way it is in our code now.
Right.
And so when that was put in, I believe the Knife River Quarry that the city owns now was still in operation when this was originally written. And I believe that's why things like that are included in here. And so if we want to go ahead and change it, certainly that's an option of getting rid of that entirely. But that's probably why is there.
And so I'm just questioning whether it's compatible with the zone as we might be thinking about it for the future.
Mm-hmm. It's a fair point.
If you take it out, then does that mean it's automatically permitted?
If you take it out, then it wouldn't be allowed at all because it's not an outright permitted use, and it's listed here as a conditional use. So if you take it out, even if somebody comes to the planning commission about it, you still can't allow it in. Whereas if it was a conditional use, that means it would have to come to the planning commission for approval under certain circumstances. Now, it could be that they do everything right and there's not anything adequate to say, no, you can't do that, and which puts you in kind of a bind, certainly. I think it would be more of an issue if there were more owners of property and involved here, but it's hard to say. Chances of something going wrong with this are a little slim, but again, it's here, and this would be the time to remove it if you want to change it.
Well, and also just thinking about the future, when we're not on the commission anymore and something else happens, is this language adequate for our future vision of this particular zone 10 years from now?
And frankly, I would argue that aggregate extraction doesn't really belong anywhere in the city, to be honest. It's just not, it's not something that is typically in a city. It's usually a use that's out in the county somewhere.
Kind of go where the gravel is.
True. But there's lots of options for gravel. It's not like it's a rare thing. You want to get rid of it?
I don't like it there.
I agree.
And
Got it.
listed permitted uses in the industrial zone, that would at least give us some discretion.
Mm-hmm. Now, right now, when it comes to our marketing of properties and trying to attract businesses, a lot of the properties that we've been talking about have been in this RC zone. And so we do provide a letter that basically says that the city organization will assist in however we can in getting the zoning changed appropriately for the use you have in mind.
And zoning amendment.
We would, well, if we had one of those big players, we probably would, or it would be a conditional, like right now, if somebody comes and they have an industrial use that they want to put in the RC zone, it's a conditional use that they'll have to come to you for, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But it is something that you'll want to look. It's unusual for a non-industrial zone to have industrial uses that are possible. I mean, you still have to come to the planning commission for it, but.
And this caught my eye because of what's going on in Oak Ridge with the quarry that some people want to put in right next to the city. A little bit different than this situation, but still there were questions about open space and environmental issues, and then traffic and dust and noise and da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
We still need to be a little bit flexible though, and some of you have heard me say this in the past, but in Camas, Washington, there's a huge old gravel pit, shopping center down in the bottom of it. And it's all beautiful.
So it doesn't look like a gravel pit anymore.
No, it doesn't.
There's a shopping center in the middle of it.
They
Yeah.
probably got all the gravel out they could and built a shopping center.
It's an active gravel pit.
I don't think it's active now, but
Well, just as an aside in that regard, Birchart Gardens up in Victoria, BC used to be an old gravel pit, and now it's world-class gardens.
Yeah.
So, but it's not really what we're talking about. I don't
Right,
think.
not really. And frankly, with the most of these lands, if you put a pit, it's going to fill up with water, which is how we got those beautiful ponds on the city's property. So, you know,
I'm not proposing that we all take a day off, but it would be interesting to sometimes go visit some of these sites.
Mhm.
Have a field day for the planning commission and things that are a little different than what we normally think about, but have had
yeah.
wonderful results.
Well, and if we were to have something like that, you'd probably end up with, we'd have to notice it as a public meeting and allow anybody else to come along. But I should just point out the same thing can be accomplished individually. Anytime any of you want a tour of any part of the city, just let me know. We can get you into the city's property through the county's mill property. Troy Cummins, the owner of a bunch of this property, is indicated that he's fine with the city taking visitors on there. So just let me know. All right. Let's see. I was on conditional uses. I read aggregate extraction. We talked about removing that. B, listed permitted uses in the I zone. C, recreation-oriented uses or activities not listed as permitted. D, residential uses not related to or in conjunction with the recreational development. E, public storage facility. F, non-recreational retail. G, governmental structure or use of land or public utility facility. H, other uses compatible with the purpose and intent of the zone and whose offsite impacts would not significantly exceed those of the other conditionally permitted uses listed in this section. 17.26.050 special standards. In an RC zone, the following special standards should be the RC zone. The following special standards shall apply unless modified as part of a planned development. A single-family dwellings and accessory uses shall meet the following minimum standards. 1, minimum lot size shall be 5,000 square feet. 2, minimum lot width shall be 50 feet. 3, minimum yard setbacks. A, front from either public or private street shall be a minimum of 15 feet. B, side shall be a minimum of 5 feet with a combined minimum of 13 feet. C, street side shall be a minimum of 15 feet. D, a garage shall have a minimum setback of 20 feet from the point of access to the vehicle doors. And E, rear shall be a minimum of 20 feet. 4, building height shall not exceed 30 feet. 5, building coverage shall not exceed 35% of the land area. 6, a carport or garage is required. 7, off-street parking will be based on the city parking standards. B, single-family attached dwellings shall meet the following standards. 1, minimum lot size shall be 2,000 square feet per unit. 2, minimum yard setbacks. A, front from either public or private street shall be 15 feet. B, sides between units shall be 0. C, sides on exterior boundaries shall be 5 feet. D, street side shall be a minimum of 15 feet. E, a garage shall have a minimum setback of 20 feet from the point of access to the vehicle doors. And F, rear shall be a minimum of 15 feet. 3, building height shall not exceed 40 feet. 4, building coverage shall not exceed 70% of the land area. 5, off-street parking will be based on the city parking standards. C, two-family dwellings and accessory uses shall meet the following standards. 1, minimum lot size shall be 7,000 square feet. 2, minimum lot width shall be 70 feet. 3, minimum yard setbacks. A, front from either public or private street shall be a minimum of 15 feet. B, side shall be a minimum of 5 feet. C, street side shall be a minimum of 15 feet. D, a garage shall have a minimum setback of 20 feet from the point of access to the vehicle doors, and E, rear shall be a minimum of 20 feet. 4, building height shall not exceed 40 feet. 5, building coverage shall not exceed 60% of the land area. 6, a carport or garage for each unit is required. Yeah.
Is that just a single car garage or is that double car?
It doesn't specify. We don't have, we have requirements to have a garage or carport, but we don't have any requirements on the size of that garage or carport.
You have to have 2 off-street vehicle parking spaces.
Yes, besides a garage.
Besides the garage.
For the single, for the R1 zone, yes. This is, this just says it's based on the city parking standards. And I believe those are always 2, there's always at least 2 per unit. So, yeah.
Why would we allow a smaller lot size in the RC zone for single-family attached dwellings than what we would in our normal residential? 3,500.
I don't know the exact motivations behind this. My understanding is that this zone was pretty much created for a specific development that was intended that never came to fruition. And that development had a wide variety of different types of housing. And they were trying to get as much flexibility as they could. So as it stands, it's kind of a mixture of zones when it comes to the types of residential activity that's allowed.
I think it's supposed to be, that portion of it is supposed to be like the condos that are out by the lake. I think that's kind of what they were envisioning when they did that part of it. That's just the history I've been told. I don't know.
With the attached dwellings or, yeah.
Is something similar to that, so they could.
I mean, yeah, some of the old documents from that development they had like a townhome neighborhood, they had a kind of like a cottage cluster almost neighborhood, they had lots of different types. And this would have accommodated all sorts of things.
It really was a marketing strategy, was to appeal to a wide array of incomes and people.
Yeah. It wasn't a bad plan at all.
No, it wasn't.
And it was all a planned development.
Right.
So it went through a pretty strenuous review process, all the stuff that they wanted to do.
Yeah.
All right. D, multifamily dwellings and accessory uses shall meet the following standards. 1, minimum lot size shall be 1,500 square feet per unit. 2, minimum yard setbacks. A, front from either a public or private street shall be 20 feet. B, side shall be a minimum of 10 feet. C, street side shall be a minimum of 15 feet. D, a garage shall have a minimum setback of 20 feet from the point of access to the vehicle doors. And E, rear shall be a minimum of 20 feet. 3, building height shall not exceed 40 feet. 4, building coverage shall not exceed 60% of the land area. 5, off-street parking shall be based on the city parking standards. E, commercial establishments shall meet the following standards. 1, off-street parking will be based on the city's parking standards. 2, a minimum of 15% of the land area shall be designated as open space with appropriate landscaping. To the maximum extent feasible, natural features of the land shall be preserved. 3, building height shall not exceed 45 feet. 4, yard setbacks. A, front from either a public or private street shall be 20 feet, and B, sides, none, except if abutting residential zones, and then the side yard shall be at least 10 feet. The required side yard shall be increased by 1/2 foot for each foot of the building, height that exceeds 20 feet. C, rear, none, except if abutting residential zones, and then the rear yard shall be at least 10 feet. The required rear yard shall be increased by 1/2 foot for each foot that the building height exceeds 20 feet.
This zone seems like it would be the appropriate zone. I don't know if you guys have seen like those condos where step out and then go right down your stairs onto the sidewalk, and the rear is where you have your garage. There's like 0 front yard setback.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a very pretty elevation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, they're really beautiful. Could we have a provision in here where in this zone maybe where something like that could work with a 0 front yard setback with the rear?
Um, It's certainly something to consider.
Or anything?
I think all of that goes to the design of the neighborhood, and a lot of the, if
They don't
correct,
have front yards at all.
right, correct me if I'm wrong, Angela, but a lot of that you could probably do through a planned development
Okay.
where it looks at the overall density of the neighborhood rather than those individual requirements. And I've seen, I mean, there's certainly lots of different ways to design a neighborhood, and some of those can work. What it boils down to is whether you're designing it appropriately. It could be really great, but I think that would be more, the plan development would be the way to go through that. Yeah, and that's one change we're looking to make, is to make, because right now the plan development zone, it's an overlay zone, and it's only on certain properties in the city. And the change that we're looking to make is to have it just be a blanket zone over the entire city, so that even if you have a smaller area, you can still do a plan development and have it be a conditional use, so that it's all of the design is reviewed by the planning commission. And it's kind of a way to do those more creative developments that, maybe they don't have enough room to do the exact setbacks, but they're designing it in such a way that they don't need on-street parking, or they don't need these things that take up space, because they've mitigated it in different ways. All right. 17.26.060 Development Plan Review. In the RC zone, submittal of a plan for development on a specific piece of property shall comply with the following. A, the site plan with proposed land uses shall include accurate measurements from property lines to and between all structures. B, building types with approximate dimensions should be submitted. The plan should indicate the general height, bulk, and appearance of buildings. C, vehicular and pedestrian access and circulation must be included on the plan. D, the configuration, including a count and size of all spaces and aisle widths of all parking areas, should be included. E, existing natural features such as streams, riparian zone, wetlands, and topography must be shown before construction and include proposed impacts to the natural resources. F, proposals for landscaping, fencing, or other barriers should be included on the plan. G, proposals for the location, size, height, and lighting of signs should be submitted. H, proposals for the provision of water, fire suppression, sewage, storm drainage, exterior lighting, and solid waste must be submitted.
This is the potential alternative to the RC zone. So it's the proposed new zone. 17.26 mixed use employment zone, MUE, alternative to the RC zone. 17.26010 purpose. Mixed use employment zone is intended to provide a mix of business and professional services, research facilities, offices, retail and services firms, and limited manufacturing opportunities. While primarily intended as an employment center, opportunities will be available for residential development as either a separate or ancillary use. It is expected that industrial uses will likely locate near or adjacent to existing rail line, while residential and commercial facilities will gravitate toward the South Santiam River. 17.26020 permitted uses. In the MUE zone, the following uses and their accessory uses are permitted outright. A, residential uses, single-family detached and attached homes, 2, duplex, 3, multifamily homes, 4, residential care homes and facilities licensed by the state of Oregon. B, commercial uses, 1, retail store or shop, such as food store, drug store, apparel store, hardware store, or furniture store. 2, personal or business services established, such as a barber or beauty shop, dry cleaning establishment, tailor shop, or locksmith. 3, repair shop for the type of goods offered for sale in retail trade establishment permitted in the C1 zone, such as shoe repair shop, small appliance repair shop, television repair shop, or watch repair shop. 4, eating or drinking establishments such as a restaurant, tavern, or cocktail lounge, except drive-in or through facilities shall not be permitted. 5, office, business, or professional. 6, financial institutions such as a bank, except drive up in or through facilities shall not be permitted. 7, indoor commercial amusement or recreation establishment such as a bowling alley, theater, or pool hall. 8, motel, hotel, or resort. 9, recreation vehicle park. 10, small-scale food beverage manufacturers, i.e. bakeries, microbreweries, where primary retail sales are on site. C, industrial uses. 1, manufacturing, fabrication, assembly, and packaging activities, including accessory storage for the following products and/or materials: cloth, fiber, fur, hair, electrical and communication equipment, cosmetics, drugs and pharmaceuticals, food, beverage, dairy products, and medical, dental, optical, precision, and surgical instruments and equipment. 2, research and scientific laboratories. 3, wholesale distribution and warehousing facilities limited to properties adjacent to railroad right-of-way. 4, wineries, breweries, and distilleries. 5, other employment uses that are compatible with the purpose and intent of the zone and having limited offsite impacts. The intent is to permit the flexibility in allowing appropriate use generated by emerging technologies. For example, server farms or call centers would be consistent with provision. D, public and community related uses. 1, art galleries, libraries, and museums. 2, community center, meeting facility, convention center, or similar use. 3, hospital, health, and medical clinics. 4, golf courses and country clubs. 5, public and private parks. 17 point.
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead.
before you go on, each of the previous land use zone chapters, it's under purpose. It starts out the purpose of the whatever zone is intended, but this one, it's just for consistency.
All right, 17.26.030, special uses. The following uses, when developed under the applicable development standards of the Development Code and special development requirements, are permitted in the RC zone. That should be the MUE zone. A, property line adjustment subject to the provisions in Chapter 17.92. B, partitions subject to provisions in Chapter 17.58. C, subdivisions subject to provisions in Chapter 17.58. D, plan development subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.60. E, cottage cluster development and subject to provisions in Chapter 17.62. Like the and. No, the rest of them have and. F, home occupation subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.68. G, residential accessory dwelling subject to the provisions of Chapter 17.72. H, temporary uses subject to provisions in Chapter 17.74. 17.26040, conditional uses. The following uses require approval of a conditional use permit. A, manufacturing, fabrication, assembly, processing, canning, packaging, compounding, storage, and treatment activities for the following activities and/or materials: brick, concrete, cement, clay, mortar, plaster and tile, chemicals and floor coverings, extraction or removal of sand, gravel, topsoil, clay, dirt, precious metals, gems or other natural resources, and paper. B, houses of worship, churches, temples, synagogues, and places of worship, including cemeteries and customary accessory buildings and uses per section 17.76. C, clubs, lodges, it's twice in there, fraternal institutions and other places of assembly for membership groups. D, governmental structure or use of land or public utility facility. E, utilities and communication facilities such as telephone exchanges, electrical substations, and television stations. F, public and private schools, kindergarten, elementary, middle, and high school. Colleges and trade schools, marijuana retailer or medical dispensary. I, any other use that is compatible with the purpose and intent of the zone and that would have off-site impacts that would not significantly exceed those that are typical of the other conditionally permitted uses listed in this section. 17.26050, development standards. In the MUE zone, the following special standards shall apply unless modified as a part of the plan development. A, single-family dwelling shall meet the following minimal standards. 1, minimum lot size shall be 5,000 square feet. 2, minimum lot width shall be 50 feet. 3, minimum yard setbacks. A, front 15, B, side 5, C, street side 15, D, garage 20 feet to entrance, E, rear 15. 4, building height 30 feet residence, 20 feet accessory building. 5, building coverage shall not exceed 40% of the land area. B, single-family attached dwelling shall meet the following standards. 1, minimum lot size shall be 2,000 square feet per unit. 2, minimum yard setbacks. A, front 15. B, sides between units 0 feet. C, sides on exterior boundaries 5 feet. D, street side 15 feet. D, garage 20 feet to entrance. E, rear 15 feet. 3, building height shall not exceed 40 feet, 20 feet accessory building. 4, building coverage shall not exceed 70% of the land area. C, 2 family dwellings and accessory uses shall meet the following standards. 1, minimum lot size shall be 7,000 square feet. Minimum lot width shall be 70 feet. 3, minimum yard setbacks. A, front 15 feet. B, side 5 feet. C, street side 15 feet. D, garage 20 feet to entrance. E, rear 15 feet. 4, building height shall not exceed 40 feet, 20 feet accessory building. 5, building coverage shall not exceed 60% of the land area. D, multifamily dwelling and accessory uses shall meet the following standards. 1, minimum lot size shall be 1,500 square feet per dwelling unit. 2, minimum yard setbacks. A, front 20. B, side 10. C, street side 15. D, garage 20 feet to entrance. E, rear 20 feet. 3, building height shall not exceed 40 feet, 20 feet for accessory structures. So that's one thing I wanted to, so we have accessory building and we have accessory structures. We need to be consistent.
There's a lot of miscellaneous
Yeah.
punctuation that's.
I'm used to saying
seeing that
accessory structure, so building kind of threw me off, but
There's like periods, there's
yeah.
semicolons, and there's none at the end of some of these.
Mm-hmm.
And that one just caught me because I'm used to saying accessory. Well, it's either accessory dwelling unit or accessory structure, so that's why that one. Okay, just one we'll just have to figure out the standard for that one. 4, building coverage shall not exceed 60% of the land area. E, commercial establishments shall meet the following standards. 1, off-street parking will be based on the city parking standards. 2, a minimum of 15% of the land area shall be designated as open space with appropriate landscaping. To the maximum extent feasible, natural features of the land shall be preserved. 3, building height shall not exceed 45 feet. 4, yard setbacks. A, front 20 feet. B, sides none except if abutting a residential use or zone, and then the side yard shall be at least 15 feet. The required side yard shall be increased by 1 foot for each foot the building height exceeds 20 feet. C, rear none except if abutting residential use or zone, and then the rear yard shall be at least 15 feet. The required rear yard shall be increased by 1 foot for each foot the building height exceeds 20 feet. 5, minimum setback. Where a side or rear yard is not required and a structure is not to be erected at the property line, it should be set back at least 3 feet from the property line. F, industrial establishments shall meet the following standards. 1, off-street parking will be based on the city parking standards. 2, a minimum of 15% of the land area shall be designed as open space with appropriate landscaping. To the maximum extent feasible, natural features of the land shall be preserved. 3, building height shall not exceed 60 feet. 4, yard setbacks. A, front 20. B, side none except if abutting a residential use or zone, and then the side yard shall be at least 20 feet. The required side yard shall be increased by 1 foot for each foot the building height that exceeds 20 feet. C, rear none except if abutting residential use or zone, and then the rear yard shall be at least 20 feet. The required rear yard shall be increased by 1 foot for each foot that the building height exceeds 20 feet. 5, minimum setback. Where a side or rear yard is not required and a structure is not to be erected at the property line, it shall be set back at least 3 feet from the property line. G, public facility and similar types of uses shall meet the following standards. 1, off-street parking will be based on the city parking standards. 2, a minimum of 15% of the land area shall be designed as open space with appropriate landscaping. To the maximum extent feasible, natural features of the land shall be preserved. 3, building height shall not exceed 50 feet. 4, yard setbacks. A, front 20 feet. B, sides none except if abutting a residential use or zone, and then the side yard shall be at least 20 feet. The required side yard shall be increased by 1 foot for each foot the building height that exceeds 20 feet. C, rear none except if abutting residential use or zone, and then the rear yard shall be at least 20 feet. The required rear yard shall be increased by 1 foot for each foot that the building height exceeds 20 feet. 17.26060 special development requirement, with the exception of constructing a single-family home, a planned development shall be required for any proposed project or development exceeding 1 acre in size.
So should we give our opinions of one or the other, or how do we do this?
So, with this area, you're certainly, of course, welcome to give your opinions on any of this at any time, and that's
Thank you.
that's a given, and you do. So you don't need to ask my permission for that. In fact, you don't have to ask my permission for anything. This, from my perspective, the recreation commercial zone has been kind of a problem because it's not very well understood by developers other than the one that it was made for. And actually, even the one that it's made for had a lot of confusion as to what was actually permitted and so forth. The concern that I have about it is that we have a massive amount of land that is not well understood by people what would develop it, and it makes it really awkward to actually do a development because of the focus on recreation. That is a great focus. It's just not. It's not attracting the developers that it should. So from an economic development standpoint, it's hard because I've got people looking for land that are like, I don't know if I can actually do this. I don't know if this will work for my business. That being said, I think it's hard to plan it out because we're trying to get as much flexibility as we can, and yet more flexibility adds to confusion sometimes. If we could just have it, sometimes I think if we could just have it divided up in zone commercial, residential, industrial, the way you would with anything else, then maybe it would be easier. But we have such large pieces of land that it's kind of unclear as to how those things should be divided up, and property owners they try to get as much flexibility for their land as possible because they want to remain open to anybody who might be interested. So I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying I really have no idea. I don't know what we want to do when it comes to really planning out these areas.
Well, the mixed use one seems to have much more robust language.
Mhm.
And in that regard, I think that's probably good,
Mhm.
except for the section about the gravel and the extraction and removal, because we already talked about that.
Mhm.
But I'm open to letting go of the old language, bringing in some new language that maybe is more facilitating of the things that you're talking about.
Yeah. I agree with your concern about the aggregate extraction and that kind of stuff. I guess we want to be really flexible, but we don't want to be so flexible as to just give away everything, right? And so I guess the question for all of you is, where's the line? What would you definitely not want to see in those areas of the city? And let's make sure we get rid of those. And then, do you have concerns about the other things, and should we have a process for doing that? The good thing about this zone and the RC zone is that last special development requirement. With the exception of constructing a single family home, a planned development shall be required for any proposed project or development exceeding 1 acre in size. That pretty much is everything that's going to be built there is going to be over 1 acre. And so there's going to be this planned development requirement. And so we want to see people, put a development together that makes sense, right? And I think that's what, given the owners of, or the owner of a large portion of this, I think that's what they're likely to do. So that's a good thing. But yeah, any other? I wonder if this might be something that that we kind of assign as homework for the commission to really do some major thinking about and pondering, and maybe take a drive over there and or give me a call and I'll take you around to the different parts of the property so that you can see it for yourself. kind of say, what do you think is going to fit with Sweet Home?
I think that's a great idea. More thinking and a field trip.
Okay. Do you want to do a planning commission trip together to these properties, or do you want to do it on an individual basis? The same as we would for any public meeting. And so we would just have to plan it ahead and
Maybe we could do it at like 6 o'clock before a planning commission meeting.
frankly, we could even do it right at 6:30 and say, the planning commission meeting is, starts at City Hall and then goes to these various sites, and then comes back. We probably could. In fact, we might even be able to arrange a bus from Sweet Home Transportation.
Yeah, and I would say whatever works in best for your work schedule is fine.
Yeah, let me see what we can arrange. And I think what I think would probably be easiest is if we could open the meeting here, and I think basically just have everybody, if we can, have everybody in their own vehicles go to different sites, if that'll work. Some of the roads are kind of iffy, so we might want 4-wheel drive for some parts of it. Let me think about that, see what I can arrange, and it'll likely be something that we'd have to plan for sometime in September for that. But that'll be my homework assignment, is to get that figured out, and your homework assignment is to review this.
So there are 2 meetings in September, and I will not be here for the second one,
Second one.
the
Okay.
16th.
Okay.
I don't know where it is or if it even exists, but I have a hunch that if we went on the internet and just looked up other areas where there has been a revitalization
Mhm.
of extraction sites, we'll probably be able to get a lot of ideas from elsewhere.
Mhm.
Almost everything's on the internet.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of natural resource sites, old mills, gravel pits, and so forth that have been redeveloped into pretty amazing places. Yeah. Okay.
Is this about a good place to stop?
Well, we have. My only concern is that we've got a lot of this to get through. So if you have the stamina to go on till 8:30, I recommend that. But if you don't, I understand.
Everybody good to 8:30?
Go.
Okay.
I'm still hanging in there.
That's because you can lie in bed.
I see him nodding.
Yeah.
So are we saying that we're gonna decide between RC and the N? We're gonna try and have both. of them in there?
So there's basically all options are on the table. You could include both of them in there. You could include a changed version of them in there. What really matters is what property is zoned afterward. What changes do you make? And you could basically say we're just going to completely change the RC zone entirely, and through this process, anybody who owns any property with that current zoning, they better pay attention and make their voice known when we have the public hearings. That's certainly an option, and then it all changes to that. You could leave the RC zone in there as a grandfather provision, but then have another zone like this mixed use employment zone you could have in there as and put it in the comp plan as being the designation, the future designation of all those areas, so that essentially it's all grandfathered in as RC zone. But then if any of the property owners want to change it to the new mixed use employment zone, they have an easy way of doing that. Or
Confusing to have both of those are the same.
yeah. And I guess when it comes to the code itself, we have lots of zones in there, and they're all recognized as being different from each other. And so I don't know that there's anything wrong with having more zones in there. What really matters is when you get down to it, what zones are in the comp plan and what zones are on the current zoning map. So you could keep, yeah, I mean, you really have lots of options when it comes to what to do here. It's just how flexible, how much do you want to have in there, and how much flexibility do you want people to have? Because when it comes to a zone, so a lot of properties have a zoning designation that is grandfathered in, right? The comp plan says that they should be high density residential, but their current zone is low density residential. And that's fine for them. They can do their single family home there if they want. But then if they decide they want to put an apartment building, they have to change the zone to what's in the comp plan designation. One thing you can do is basically say, well, yeah, they can change. This is what their zoning is. Let's just change the actual zone, the rules of the zone that they're in. And you can do that subject to the public hearings that we have to go through to make that happen. So it kind of gives you the ability to write the rules of the game as much as you want, really, as long as we go through the public process of it being adopted so that the public has a chance to weigh in on the changes that you make. All right. 17.28 Natural Resources Overlay Zone, NRO. 17.28.010 Purpose. The NR zone is designed to protect identified significant natural resources in the city of Sweet Home. The intent of this zone is to ensure reasonable economic use of property while protecting valuable natural resources. Requirements in this chapter apply only to that portion of a property located within the NRO zone. There seems to be some consistency between NR and NRO. Inconsistency, I should say. 17.28.020 Establishment and Applicability. The NR zone is an overlay zone.
The reason why it's that way, I think, is NR and natural resource overlay.
Okay. We just need to be consistent there, though. The NRO zone is an overlay zone. Shouldn't be is used. It's just used and applied to any parcel having one of the following identified natural resources. A, significant wetlands as mapped in the city's local wetlands inventory, LWI. B, riparian corridors as mapped in the city's riparian inventory. 17.28.030 Activities subject to review. In the NRO zone, the following actions are subject to review. These shall be processed as a Type 1 application and subject to the standards contained in this chapter and applicable provisions of the underlying zone. A, new structural development. B, exterior expansion of any building or structure. C, increases in impervious surfaces or storage areas. D, grading, excavation, or fill. E, removal of native vegetation. 17.28.040 Exceptions in the riparian zone. The following activities may be accepted from the requirements of this chapter upon administrative review approval, that they are designed to meet the standards listed in this chapter. That doesn't sound right. Upon administrative review approval, that they. It just seems awkward. What was the question?
What does subject to the review mean? What does that all include? Review by staff or commission?
Subject to review. So essentially, it is review by staff under these rules. So it just means that beyond, even if the underlying zone says have an outright permitted to build a apartment complex there, they also, if they happen to have significant wetlands in the riparian corridors on that property, they also have to provide this other information that we're asking for in this chapter, of how they're going to deal with that. But it's all done through a administrative review. It doesn't have to go to planning commission. Yeah. So exceptions, A, drainage facilities, utilities and irrigation pumps. B, streets, roads, driveways, or paths. C, water-related and water-dependent uses. D, replacement of existing structures with structures in the same location that do not disturb additional riparian surface area. E, removal of non-native vegetation and replacement with native plant species. F, alteration of the area by placement of structures or impervious surfaces within the riparian zone upon demonstration that equal or better protection for identified resources will be ensured through restoration of riparian zone areas, enhanced buffer treatment, or similar measures, providing that the alterations not exceed 50% of the width of the riparian area measured from the upland edge of the zone. Just a little on this thing, one of the concerns that I've had with the way we deal with this now is one of the exceptions in the riparian zone is streets, roads, driveways, or paths. So there was a apartment building that was approved not long ago that has riparian zone on it, and they design it in such a way that their parking lot is the only part of the property that is in the riparian zone, and driveways is an exception to that rule. And so that puts us in this kind of bind where it's like, well, the whole reason we have this zone is to protect these riparian areas, and here they're allowed to do it, but they're basically paving over the whole thing, which is not exactly the intent of what the zone is. And so I'm wondering, this might be an area where we want to beef it up a little bit and say, okay, make sure it's clear. Maybe a gravel driveway is permitted, but not a parking lot or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what those changes would look like, but it is a concern of mine, at least. Wouldn't you say, Angela? But I just don't know what to change it to.
It says impervious surface too.
Mhm.
We haven't got to that point yet. Usually it'll say in the impervious surface if it's near that. So, yes, it is a, you don't want it to be paved right up into the edge of the riparian zone.
So I mean, it may be something where B is streets, roads, driveways, or paths, comma, provided that they are the minimum width necessary to handle the traffic or something like that. Because that way you can make it clear that a parking lot is not something that you can just plan to put in the riparian zone. That makes sense?
Well, can't we ask the consultant what the appropriate language would be?
I can check. Yeah.
I mean, they might even have a template for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll do some more research on that. All right. 17.28.050 agency review. Decisions made by the City of Sweet Home under this chapter do not supersede the authority of the state or federal agencies which may regulate or have an interest in the activity in question. A, it is the responsibility of the landowner or applicant to ensure that any necessary state or federal permits or clearances are obtained. B, the city will notify the Division of State Lands for development permits and other land use decisions affecting inventory wetlands. 17.28.060 General Development Standards. A, the City of Sweet Home has adopted safe harbor setback methodology for the identification of significant riparian corridors and significant wetlands. These resources are identified on the local wetlands inventory and riparian inventory maps. Property owners are responsible to have a qualified professional identify the wetlands boundary on the affected property. Natural area, South Santiam River, width of vegetated corridor per side, 75 feet. For Ames Creek and Wiley Creek, it's 50 feet. B, setbacks for structures within a riparian corridor are measured from the top of bank, which is the line of ordinary high water in a 2-year event. C, for an exception to be allowed, the applicant shall comply with the following requirements. 1, demonstrate that no other practicable access to the buildable area exists. 2, design roads, driveways, and paths to be the minimum width necessary while allowing for safe passage of vehicles and/or pedestrians. 3, consider the need for future extensions of shared access easements, or private streets in order to avoid subsequent encroachments into a significant natural resource. 4, during construction, no stockpiling of fill materials, parking, or storage of equipment shall be allowed within a significant natural resource. 5, erosion control measures such as silt fences and biofilter bags shall be used to reduce the likelihood of sediment and untreated stormwater entering a significant natural resource. 6, utilities and drainage facilities. Public and private utilities or drainage facilities may be placed when it is shown that no other practicable alternative location exists. If a utility or drainage facility is allowed, the following standards shall apply. A, demonstrate that no other practicable access exists. B, the corridor necessary to construct utilities shall be the minimum width practical so as to minimize intrusion into a significant natural resource. C, removal of trees and native vegetation shall be avoided unless absolutely necessary. Native vegetation shall be used to restore the vegetative character of the construction corridor. D, the existing grade of the land shall be restored after construction. E, no stockpiling of filled materials, parking, or storage of equipment shall be allowed within a significant natural resource. 7, structures or other non-conforming alterations existing fully or partially within a significant natural resource may be expanded provided the expansion occurs outside of a significant natural resource. Substantial improvement of a non-conforming structure in a significant natural resource shall require compliance with the standards of this chapter. 8, existing lawn within a significant natural resource may be maintained but not expanded within the limits of a significant natural resource. Development activities shall not justify replacement of native vegetation, especially riparian vegetation, with lawn. D, vegetation removal and replacement. 1, removal of non-native vegetation and replacement with native plant species is allowed and shall comply with the following requirements. 2, following requirements, and then it doesn't have anything.
Are berry burrs considered non-native?
There's the native Oregon Himalayan or they're invasive species.
Okay, so those could potentially be removed out of the riparian
Yeah,
and replaced.
with native vegetation. The replacement vegetation shall, at a minimum, A, cover the area from which vegetation was removed, B, maintain or exceed the density of the removed vegetation, C, maintain or improve the shade provided by the vegetation. E, trees in danger of falling and thereby posing a hazard to life or property may be removed following consultation and approval from the community development director.
Should that be community development director or a designee?
Possibly. Probably. Because I would probably defer to an actual expert. Yeah. F, the control or removal of nuisance plants should primarily be by non-chemical means, e.g. hand pulling. We'll go back to the trees issue. In the question of trees, usually we've deferred to the Park and Tree Committee on that. And so I wonder if we might want to, I hate to have people consult a committee. Let me think on that and see, because we deal with trees all the time that have issues with them, and usually we try to consult, somebody with an actual arborist.
So, but, it has to, private property, they have to, the owner has to consult an arborist. If it's on public property, then our park country.
Okay.
So that property is on.
Well, in this case, it would be public property, or it'd be private property, I mean. And so,
propose an arborist. That was the decision made within the park and tree.
So maybe that's what we should stick in there and just have an arborist approve it. F, the control and removal of nuisance. Oh, I already read that part. 1, if non-chemical means fails to adequately control nuisance plant populations, a glyphosate-based herbicide or other environmentally safe herbicide may be used. 2, no pre-emergent herbicides or auxin herbicides that pose a risk of contaminating water should be used. 3, herbicide applications must be applied according to manufacturer specifications.
Going back to item E, where you're talking about consultation,
Mm-hmm.
You could say following consultation with, I don't know, licensed professional or something where you're designating who the category
Right.
of consultation. They're just not consulting with their neighbor.
Say like a qualified arborist.
Yeah. Qualified professional.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
Blair, who decides whether glyphosate is environmentally safe or not?
That's, yeah, it kind of struck me. It's
certainly controversial.
it is a controversial one. So I would, that the problem is, even when you just say the part that says other environment, first of all, I don't agree with other, because I don't think glyphosate is necessarily environmentally safe. But even if that wasn't there, just having the words environmentally safe herbicide, we don't have any definition of what that might be. So there's definitely an enforcement issue with that. We're just not qualified to determine whether or not an herbicide is environmentally safe or not. I would feel more comfortable if it pointed to some body that actually knows what they're talking about when it comes to whether something is environmentally safe or not.
Say, how about EPA?
Perhaps I think something that where we'd probably want to research what this actually means and whether this is, first of all, it may be something that we don't want to get into at all, but it is concerning. I think that probably warrants additional research.
One of these days, you're going to have to go through a whole list of additional research with us.
Yeah, I got a bunch of notes. So, yeah.
Spare time.
All right, 17.28.070 variances. A variance to the provisions of this chapter may be applied for to consider claims of map errors verified by DSL and when necessary to allow reasonable economic use of the subject property. Permanent alteration of the significant natural resource by an action requiring a variance is subject to the mitigation procedures and criteria of this chapter. Variances shall be processed per provisions in chapter 17.106. 17.28.080 mitigation standards. When impacts to any identified significant natural resource occur, mitigation will be required. A, for impacts to wetlands, the following standards and criteria shall apply. 1, the applicant must obtain a fill and removal permit from the Oregon Division of State Lands and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. 2, the applicant must provide an approved mitigation plan that complies with all Oregon Division of State Lands and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers wetland regulations. B, for impacts to riparian corridors, the following standards and criteria shall apply. 1, a mitigation plan prepared by a qualified professional shall be submitted to the city. The mitigation plan shall meet the following criteria. A, mitigation for impacts to a non-wetlands riparian area shall require a minimum mitigation area ratio of 1:1. B, the mitigation plan shall document 1, the location of the impact, 2, the existing conditions of the resource prior to impact, 3, the location of the proposed mitigation area, 4, a detailed planting plan of the proposed mitigation area with species and density, 5, a narrative describing how the resource will be replaced. 2, mitigation shall occur on site and as close to the impact area as possible. If this is not feasible, mitigation shall occur within the same drainage basin as the impact. 3, all vegetation planted within the mitigation area shall be native to the region. Species to be planted in the mitigation area shall replace those impacted by the development activity. 4, trees shall be planted at a density of not less than 5 per 1,000 square feet. Shrubs shall be planted at a density of not less than 10 per 1,000 square feet. 17.28.09 Plan Amendment Option. A, any owner of property affected by the NRO zone may apply for a zone amendment. The amendment must be based on a specific development proposal. The effect of the amendment would be to remove the NR zone from all or a portion of the property. The applicant shall demonstrate that such an amendment is justified by completing an environmental, social, economic, and energy (ESEE) consequences analysis prepared in accordance with Oregon administrative rules. If the application is approved, then the ESEE analysis shall be incorporated by reference into the applicable Sweet Home inventory and the map shall be amended. B, the ESEE analysis shall adhere to the following requirements. 1, the ESEE analysis must demonstrate to the ultimate satisfaction of the Sweet Home City Council that the adverse economic consequences of not allowing the conflicting use are sufficient to justify the loss or partial loss of the resource. 2, the ESEE analysis must demonstrate why the use cannot be located on land outside of the natural resource area. 3, the ESEE analysis shall be prepared by a qualified professional experienced in the preparation of Goal 5 ESEE analyses with review by DLCD. All right. Any questions on that?
Seems complicated and over my head.
Yeah. In other words, don't build on stuff that's in the wetlands or in the riparian corridor.
Well, that brings us awfully close to 8:30.
Yeah. Close enough, I think.
Public hearing something?
Or
Couple
not
of
a public hearing.
comments.
Close the meeting.
I kind of believe in Roundup. But if you were in Hawaii, it's a total swear word. I can promise you that.
Don't mention that to my wife. She doesn't care for it either.
And I know we'll come to fences later, but something for all of us to think about a little bit is we have side lot fence requirements. We have reduced heights as it comes towards the front.
Mhm.
When you've got two houses that are back, the backyards are back to back, then they can use side lot requirements for their fences. But other houses on that same street with frontage on the street have to live with and grow up with, 5-6 foot fences. It doesn't, in other words, they're corner lots that allow pretty tall fences on their side.
Yeah.
lot. And we may want to give a little thought to that and
If it's abutting a street, it's a 6-foot fence right on the sidewalk, right?
yeah,
It can't be if it's abutting the street. It's not unless they build it without a permit. You have to be 20 feet back in order for it to go up to the maximum 7 feet. Otherwise, it can be up to 4 feet tall. So if
Yeah.
someone built it
Yeah.
taller than that, and they did it without a permit.
Yeah.
There's a new one on Second and
So that's what our criteria says right now.
is that street is that?
well, there are two new fences on Fifth Avenue,
There's one on Second too.
houses that actually face on other streets, but the fences are right on the sidewalk.
Mhm.
Center line,
Well, that sounds like they're not in compliance
and
and
they're
probably
they're
don't have
nice
trucks.
looking fences, but they won't be in 10 years, I can promise you that.
Well,
It's like
Yeah.
a big wall when you're walking
Yeah.
on the sidewalk and you've got the street,
They
the
most
sidewalk, and
likely
then a
did
big
not get a
wall.
fence
A
permit.
whole block,
Uh-huh.
what it amounts to is a whole block
Yep.
of wooden fence right against the sidewalk.
So,
About
yeah.
6 feet high.
Then they didn't get, because I know I only had 3 fence permits all last month, so guaranteed.
You still need to get closer to the mic.
Oh, your mic's off.
Oh,
That's all right. I kind of put together what
Yeah.
you said.
so current criteria, so they most likely did not get a fence permit because we only had a couple last month. And current criteria, that would not be allowed. If they would have come in and gotten a permit, we would have told them they couldn't have done that.
Yeah, so they're out of compliance and
So,
we can,
so if it's a solid.
we can have our code compliance officer talk to them. It's
I don't
a-
want to get anybody into trouble, but
Hawthorne and Second is
Yeah.
the one by my house.
Okay,
It's just like a big solid wall.
a block long,
Where did
solid
you
wall,
get-
wooden fence.
Mm.
Fifth?
well, we'll have to look into that, but that's not, it's not permitted. I mean, technically, I mean, obviously they've gotten it done. But it's an enforcement issue then, rather than a rules issue. So, Hawthorne in Second, you said?
Yeah, so, yeah, that's not allowed. And we get that a lot. People aren't real happy when they get turned in because then they have to take their fence down. But if it's a solid wood fence up against the street, up against the sidewalk, they can be up against the sidewalk, their property line. But for solid wood, it can only be 3.5 feet. And for metal fencing, it can be 4 feet. So otherwise, around the back, it can be up to 7 feet, but not along the street. So they most likely did not come in and talk to me.
And that was Fifth Avenue where?
Fifth Avenue at about the 9 to 1000 numbers.
Okay. We'll have to
They-
look into
they
that.
did go to some effort to build some nice fences. But we're gonna come, we or the city's gonna come across this more than just this time.
Yeah.
When we come to our fence ordinance, I just want us to be aware of.
Yeah. Well, and
what's
it,
happening.
it's unfortunate, but in all likelihood, the ordinance itself is probably fine, and it's the enforcement that we need to step up.
And part of it too is we get a lot of times people will come in and say, well, my neighbor did this. And it's like, well, your neighbor didn't get a permit and your neighbor didn't follow criteria. Well, how come my neighbor can do this? It's like, well, if you want to complain, we can go do a code compliance call on them. And so that's how we find out is by that. But a lot of times, same thing with, shops and whatnot. People come in and say, well,
Yeah.
my neighbor did this. And so unfortunately, that's pretty much how we end up finding out is, they saw
Yeah.
what their neighbors were doing and they did it and which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and usually fences is not something that our code compliance officer usually has his eye out for. Usually is looking at tall grass and weeds, trash, junk, those kinds of things. And so when there's nice materials, it usually doesn't catch his eye. But it is something that he should be paying attention to also, and I'll be talking to him about. Right. But it's a balance because a lot of the work he does is complaint based. So we have people who are calling in to complain about issues that they see. And if we don't have anybody complaining about that fence, he may not get to it soon enough. And by the time he has seen it, it's been they completed the fence a long time ago. They're used to it, and it makes it harder to enforce at that point.
Did he have a variance process where they could come in and apply for that 6-foot fence on the?
It'd be like any variance,
Yeah.
unless there's a topographical issue or something that's unavoidable. They just want a tall fence. It doesn't follow variance
Because
criteria.
their Side yard is abutting the street.
And that's, and that-
Side yard.
yeah, and
It's their side yard, that's their rear yard because they've got the alleyway. They access their garage off the alleyway and their front yard
yeah,
is on Second Street.
right.
Now, if they have enough room, they could move it 20 feet from the property line and then they can have it that height.
It basically would be a setback off of the street essentially.
So they can do a setback of 20 feet and then they can have it taller. if
People
if it's
usually
up
don't
against
have
there.
big enough yards to be able to do that, though.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the other exception to it, so.
But yeah, it's frustrating. We'll get on that. We'll take a look at that.
I'm not suggesting that we tear it down, but.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to see it happening elsewhere in the city either.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's
Right.
the thing that makes it hard is that by a lot of time, by the time
Because
we
they
find
just
out it's already built, doesn't take long to put up a fence.
Stuff in their yard,
Yeah.
play structures and what they took that fence down that we have to look at.
Yeah. Yep.
So, forget I said anything.
Forget I said anything either.
Uh,
The recorder's off, right?
No,
Nope.
not yet. Once you close the meeting, I'll turn it off.
Okay. Everybody wrapped up for the night?
Yeah.
Meeting's closed at 8:36.
All right.
Bye, Greg.
Thank you, Commissioner Corn.
Good night, everybody.
You're still awake. Good.
Yeah, I hung in for the whole thing.